We produce actual energy by converting the food we eat into something called adenosine triphosphate, better known as ATP. And ATP is often called the energy currency of the body because in a sense we pay for all of our biological actions with ATP. To release the energy from ATP, it is broken apart into smaller components in a process called hydrolysis, using an enzyme called ATPase. ATP is broken into these smaller components to produce an adenosine diphosphate, a single phosphate molecule, and energy. So food is eaten, eventually converted into ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. And when ATP is used to produce work for all of your metabolic needs and daily activities. And heat is also produced in the process of making energy. Essentially, you simply have changed the chemical composition of the food you eat into other forms of usable energy and heat. This follows what is known to you as the first law of thermodynamics, which states that energy is neither created nor destroyed, but only changed in form. So ATP is stored chemical energy that links the energy producing and energy requiring functions within all of our cells. This energy fuels all forms of biological work. Just think about processes that utilize ATP like digestion and absorption, nerve transmission, blood circulating through your body, and muscular contractions. One question you may have is, how do we make and replace our stores of ATP? Well, we have 3 energy systems to do this for us. In all 3 systems, a phosphate group is added to adenosine diphosphate, or ADP, in a process called phosphorylation to ultimately create adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And what this means is that phosphate is added to ADP and then it's stored as ATP until the energy in ATP is needed for activities like walking up the stairs, picking up a box, or exercising. The really interesting part is that each energy system has a specific role and works at the highest rate based upon how hard or how intense you are working. Each system has a different way of providing ATP, but it is important to realize that they are used on a continuum and they do overlap quite a bit. In addition, certain parts of each of the 3 energy systems can also work to provide ATP in the other 2 energy systems. So while this may sound confusing and problematic, it is actually a really cool way for you to get all of the ATP out of whatever it is that you are doing and whatever fuel source, carbs, fats, or proteins, that you are using to provide the energy. And by understanding these 3 energy systems, what you will gain is the ability to decide what to eat or what certain nutrients may be best to support whatever it is you are actually doing. Think about it like this. If you are doing something that uses more carbohydrates to produce ATP, then you will know what to eat to optimize not only your performance, but also your body composition. But on the other hand, if you are doing something in your daily routine that burns more fat for ATP or energy production, then there is less need to eat carbohydrates at that time. And this allows you to better understand what you should eat to optimize energy production, limit storing excess fat, and improve success for fat loss. Now, I'll describe these energy systems in terms of how carbohydrates, fats, and proteins are used to make ATP. But in reality, we don't go to the grocery store and buy carbs, proteins, and fats individually. We buy and eat food. And foods are typically a combination of the 3 macronutrients. So while this may be some of the nitty-gritty details of how you make energy, we will follow this lecture up with plenty of information that might be more readily applicable to your body composition goals. Sounds good, right? Well, let's get into it. The 3 energy-producing systems are the creatine phosphate system, the glycolytic system, and the oxidative system. All of these systems work to provide us energy, but one system typically is used more than the others during different exercise and rest scenarios. So for the first energy system, the creatine phosphate system, this works hardest for us during maximal intensity exercise. Just think about running fast for a few seconds or lifting a heavy object or weight. That's the creatine phosphate system. In this system, you will create ATP first by combining a phosphate with stored creatine, which is a combination of amino acids, to form creatine phosphate. Then, the enzyme creatine kinase breaks the phosphate off of creatine phosphate and allows it to combine with ADP. This forms more ATP and free creatine. This process is anaerobic. It occurs without oxygen. Now, of course, you are still breathing oxygen at the normal 21% that exists in the atmosphere. But these energy-creating processes are called anaerobic, meaning without oxygen, because ATP can be produced without the presence of oxygen in the cells. Think about when you run up a flight of stairs and you're out of breath. This would be a lack of oxygen in your cells, but the ability to get up the stairs despite the lack of oxygen is provided primarily by the creatine phosphate system. So the term anaerobic also tells us that this system is one that will work when you are doing intense activity or exercise. So the creatine phosphate energy system works quickly, but it does not last for long. About 30 seconds is all you'll get, depending on your fitness level. But it is the most rapid method to regenerate ATP. But don't think that just because the creatine phosphate system is so short-lived that it isn't valuable. It is extremely useful to us. Think about any time you need to do a very quick action. Quickly jump out of the way of something, run quickly for a few steps, or lift something heavy. All of these require the creatine phosphate system. If you're really active, this system is also handy to give quick, hard efforts when you need to run up a hill, pass someone in a race, or lift heavy weights. Most exercise physiology textbooks will set a 30-second limit rule for this system. But the creatine phosphate system can be used at nearly any point of activity and repeated after a short break, even though the energy production only lasts for a few seconds. This is because of something called the size principle for muscle use, which says that you can recruit muscles for activity in an orderly and efficient fashion, from smallest to largest. So some muscles will burn through their stored creatine phosphate, but other larger muscle fibers will keep it until it is needed for a burst of high-intensity activity. Interestingly, creatine stores are useful for everyone, not just power and strength athletes. Also, although creatine is made naturally in our bodies, we do get some from the foods we eat, mostly from meat. So yes, vegetarians and vegans who primarily eat vegetables will likely have less stored creatine. But creatine can also be consumed as a supplement. In fact, it is the most widely studied sports nutrition supplement on the planet, and now research is showing the benefits of creatine supplement use for just about every population, young, old, healthy, and diseased. We'll discuss this and other supplements later in the course. The second energy system is the glycolytic system, which is also called anaerobic glycolysis. And this system relies on carbohydrates as a fuel source to make energy. The glycolytic system lasts longer than the creatine phosphate system, but probably not more than about 2 minutes while you are working hard. It is also called anaerobic glycolysis because, once again, you produce ATP without the need for oxygen in your cells. Think of an athlete running a 400-meter dash, or think of yourself doing short swimming intervals or treadmill exercise that you could only maintain for 1 to 2 minutes before needing a break. Glycolysis, as the name implies, is the breakdown of carbohydrates or glucose to make ATP. And glucose is in any type of carbohydrate that you would eat or drink. It could be a sports drink, it could be a piece of bread, or even an apple. But once the glucose is in your blood, you need to get it into your cells to break it down to either make ATP or to store it as glycogen for later use. You can use stored glycogen or the glucose from food that you've recently eaten to make ATP. In both cases, you first need to get the glucose into your cells. Okay, luckily, there's an elaborate system of proteins called GLUT transporters that assist with this. The glycolytic energy system is one you rely on during any sort of physical activity. Again, the three energy systems work on a continuum where they are all working but kick in to a much greater extent when required by the intensity for what you are doing, whether typing on your computer or lifting weights or running a marathon. So during glycolysis, your body breaks down glucose to eventually produce molecules called pyruvate as well as ATP. It's interesting to note that glycolysis both uses up and produces ATP. So along this pathway, the net amount of ATP produced is considered moderate at best. And don't forget, this energy system can only sustain activity for about 2 minutes. And the other end product of the glycolytic system, in addition to ATP, is pyruvate. Under conditions where oxygen is limited, like during hard exercise, pyruvate will go on to form lactate. And lactate, or lactic acid, is often considered to be a bad thing. You've probably heard of people saying that lactate causes pain in your legs when exercising, for example. Well, truth be told, lactate is the good guy, not the bad guy of metabolism. Lactate is actually a storage depot for the excess hydrogen ions produced as a byproduct of this glycolytic energy system working to make you ATP. You see, when you break down glucose to make some ATP, you also produce hydrogen ions. Well, if you're working out intensely, then the hydrogen ions will accumulate and build up, eventually causing a drop in your pH of the muscles. This drop in pH from the hydrogen ions is known as lactate acidosis and is painful. It is this acidity that makes you slow down or even stop for a breather during exercise. But here's why lactate is not bad. The lactic acid formed helps keep glycolysis functioning to make just a little more ATP or to give you energy to perform more work for just a little bit longer before you have to slow down or stop. One really neat thing about lactate is that it can also be transformed back into glucose for later use in this glycolytic energy system. The process of forming new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, in this case from lactate, is called gluconeogenesis.